idea of the matrix or the amount of manipulation that may have occurred in the past to the extent to where we're in a simulation now, I have a difficult time believing it. Maybe it's because, my background is Christianity. If anything, I think the simulation that we're in, if you want to call it that, is that there was an intelligent being that created the universe and planned a whole story for us ahead of time, and we're all living as characters in that story, yet somehow magically have our own free will. I think that's a much more hopeful way to live than to think we're a bunch of chunks of flesh and blood in a very Darwinistic manner, just hurtling through space on a rock, trying to see who can survive and make the most kids or money or have the most homes or cars or whatever, and then it's game over. And it's also a much more hopeful way to live compared to thinking that this is all just a simulation.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Love Conquers Fear. We are back from an amazing trip in Bhutan, really different model for society. I asked the guide to really describe, who's traveled all over the world, how he would compare Bhutan to other countries. And I think he nailed it, which is the fact that all of the temples in Bhutan, many of which are 400 years old, still are used today. So a lot of places you visit in the world, all throughout Europe, all over the world, are all about what used to be versus what is. And Bhutan is about both. So you have a country of around 700,000 people. It's known as one of the happiest places on earth. And it's very Buddhist. It has a monarchy, but the monarchy is extremely humble, lives in one of the smallest homes in the nation. It's not some grand palace. And they're like, this is all we need. And they're very focused on modernizing Bhutan in the south with a new city. But that city is one where it's focused on mindfulness at its core. So you've got high tech meeting mindfulness, meeting deep Buddhist roots, and a very communal atmosphere where people still use all of the ancient temples. And it really provides this environment where you can feel the love in the air. You can feel that people really have each other's backs. And it's very interesting. Definitely an interesting way for me to end the year. I'm actually recording this right now on December 30th. We just got back yesterday. And it's one of the case studies in my book that's coming out in 2026, Love Conquers Fear, with the subtitle Humanity, AI, and the Age of Abundance for All. And the reason I'm highlighting as a case study is a lot of my friends have been asking me, well, what happens when we get to this age of abundance for all? Are we all just going to meditate like people in Bhutan do? And I always say, well, yeah, some of society is going to choose to do that. What's wrong with humanity getting back to a state of play and community as opposed to just being on the constant working treadmill? But that doesn't mean that all of society is going to do that. There's going to be very ambitious people that want to have a Star Trek-like future and want to go and visit a quasar and go into a spaceship and help populate another planet with life. And there's an endless universe as far as we know of. If it had a border, that would certainly be very interesting. And so there's just so much to do, and there's no limit to human ambition. But yeah, for some of society, once we hit abundance, they'll live more like the Bhutanese, and there's nothing wrong with that. So it was really neat seeing it. It was both seeing a living time capsule, but also seeing, modernization meeting the past and really honoring the past and community. So very, very interesting way for us to end the year. I think I mentioned that I was writing about Bhutan in my book when my wife came in the office and said, hey, guess what? I just booked a family trip to Bhutan. I thought you might like that. And she actually didn't even know I was writing about it. So it was a great Celestine prophecy moment. And there we went. Off we went. The kids loved it too. And we all had a really, really good time. So I'm going to jump right into this episode with my good friend who is in town, Ben Greenfield.
Howdy.
Yeah, it's so good to have you here.
Yeah, Bhutan sounds, I don't know if I would survive. My wife makes fun of me because I would probably be really crappy at a ceaseless meditative approach to the age of abundance because I can't sit still for more than an hour.
Let me be clear. There's a lot to do in
Yeah.
Bhutan. There's a lot to do. I mean, we were very much on the move.
You didn't just sit like this the whole time.
No. I did do some meditation, which was really cool, but there was a lot of hiking involved, and it was actually pretty intense because you're at a very high elevation. When you fly into Bhutan, it's the hardest landing, I think, of any country. So you land in between two mountains, and the plane's going down, and on either side are where people live. So you're actually seeing their homes as you're going down.
Probably some kind of intense thermal coming in between two mountains, I would imagine.
Yes.
There's a lot of turbulence on landing.
Not too much, but you do have to be a very specialized type of pilot to even make the landing.
So if you're hiking there from like an altitude acclimation standpoint, what type of meters or feet are we talking about?
Yeah, it's not easy. So the hardest hike was actually the last day where we're hiking to Tiger's Nest, which is the most iconic temple.
Yeah,
and
that's the one in all the photos, right?
That's the one in all the photos,
cliff.
yeah. That's the one when I texted you a photo.
Yeah.
That was the one I texted you. You know, you're hiking up a good, around 2,000 feet, and you're already at very high elevation.
What's the overall elevation?
Around 9,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's at about 6,000 that your oxygen carrying capacity starts to take a little bit of a hit. Like that's where you actually feel the effects.
Yeah.
So 9,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
9,000
I felt it.
Is drink your beet juice territory.
Yeah, it was amazing trip and highly recommended. And
it's on the bucket list. I mean, I talked with you about it a few months ago before your trip, which got me even more interested in. But just before that, hearing about the measurement of gross domestic happiness,
yes,
and a lot of the unique aspects you were just harping on. Yeah, it's definitely a place I want to get.
Yeah, it's interesting. You don't notice any of the comparison machine going on.
Really?
I didn't see any aspect of that at all.
So no like peacocking for social proof, is that
not that I saw?
What you mean?
No. Just like people really in community, really taking care of each other, and
it's in stark contrast because there's Bhutan, and then it would be westward of that would be Nepal, right? And then westward of that would be India. So they're very close to like the caste system in India. So the social hierarchy, you don't see a lot of that in Bhutan.
No, you don't. The caste system really is a product of Hinduism. I don't know. Have you ever read the Bhagavad Gita?
No.
It's phenomenal, and it's not that long. It's really nothing to be intimidated by. I ignorantly was intimidated by it before I actually just picked it up. It's only takes about 2.5 hours to read.
Oh.
But it does start out with the caste system. And the whole Bhagavad Gita is so divine, such a beautiful read. It's a great setup. It's a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. And Arjuna and Krishna are in the center of a battlefield where time stops. And Arjuna is looking across the battlefield thinking, wow, so many family members are about to die. He's got family on this side of the battlefield too. And he's just lamenting, like, how did we end up in this place? And Krishna becomes the embodiment of God. And Arjuna gets to ask any question about how everything in the universe works to Krishna. Mm-hmm. So it's a great conversation between the two. And the only part of it that I reject, the only part that really felt wrong was the caste system. But everything else like synced with all of the other religious texts.
So is the entire book dialogue between those two?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the entire Bhagavad Gita.
All right, well, it's about 2.5 hours, Austin up to Denver, which I think is my connecting flight on Sunday.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
might be able to pull it off.
Yeah, you really should. And get the Stephen Mitchell translated version.
Okay.
Because his voice is so beautiful in it. I highly recommend it.
Oh, you mean the audio version?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because that way you can just hear the dialogue back and forth. It's really, really cool.
Done. I'll make it happen.
Yeah. So, gosh, it's a real honor to have you on the podcast. You've been podcasting for 19 years.
Too long. Yeah. Back when podcasting was in its early ages, like submitting your feed to Apple and waiting typically a couple weeks for your RSS feed to get accepted.
Right.
It breaking frequently. You have to go to one of the feed reader websites and work that out if the megabyte file is of a certain volume. And there was like maybe maybe 4 or 5 health podcasts, right? Which is my niche. So yeah, I got in pretty early. It was just like me, and I was actually using the camera on my computer. And so the first few I did their video, and they were just me with a few research journals, dissecting them and making them palatable to the general audience in the health and fitness world. And then eventually I got sick of the video, hair, makeup, pants, everything that video requires, switched to audio and did audio interviews, audio podcasting for like the next decade. And eventually my team convinced me I had to do video again, so I'm back to video. But yeah, I've seen, it's kind of like blogging, right? It started off and then got super saturated, and podcasting kind of took the same route.
Yeah, I did. Gosh, I probably did my first blogs about that long ago.
I've always loved to write. And after I finished my exercise physiology and biomechanics degree at Idaho, I started racing all over the world in Ironman. So I'm just basically, trekking to all sorts of different countries in spandex and getting dropped off with my bike and my wetsuit and my running shoes, racing, going to the next spot, and writing as I went. And that's how I would pay for a lot of my racing, is I would have sponsors, and I'd be explaining how to use certain energy gels and carb protein mixes and amino acids and electrolytes. And I was kind of like a race car with with the logos on my gear as I'd race. And the website actually still exists. It was bengreenfieldtry.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And I literally just did like travel writing and race writing for about 6 years before I put on my big boy clothes and started doing a little bit more research-based articles and books. But initially it was just like me and my laptop, like whatever, in the back of a tuk-tuk in Thailand, just hammering away on travel writing. And that eventually became, my website, the podcast, doing, all the things I do online now. But it was originally just travel writing, basically.
That's cool.
Yeah, blogging.
What got you into biohacking? What was the original? What was the original genesis?
Yeah, well, biohacking. It's like it's almost like an abused word now, because it can mean so many things. The original biohackers. We're talking like all the way back into the late 70s. They were true cyborgs. Like, they would call their bodies wetware, and what they would put onto or into their bodies would be hardware. So you've got like, there was one company that created a compass that would vibrate when you face true north, and that's literally like embedded in the chest region. There were people like Kevin Warwick, who inspired a few other people to do like the magnetic implants in the fingertips for human machine interfacing, kind of like Tom Cruise in Minority Report. Chlorophyll injected into the eyeballs for night vision. Wow. And some of the things that we still use nowadays in a medical setting, like ear implants for better hearing and things like that. But those were like the OG cyborg biohackers. Probably the modern day equivalent of that would be something like Neuralink, for example. Even though there are also implantables like a glucose monitor on the back of my arm, which isn't that invasive, but some people might consider that to be biohacking, right? An invasive measurement tool for quantification of glucose. And then there's also the fitness side of biohacking, kind of separate from like the tech entrepreneur side of biohacking. And that would be like the classic bodybuilders who, back in the day, before anybody knew what a peptide was, were doing things like peptides and selective androgen receptor modulators for tweaking hormones, and of course steroids and testosterone and other injectables to allow them to become way bigger than a human being would normally be from a muscular standpoint. And so my initial kind of exposure to biohacking was a little bit more of the latter. Because starting at age 14, I got super interested in just human performance in general. So at University of Idaho, like I mentioned, I studied a lot of this stuff, and at the same time started to dabble, before I got into Ironman, in bodybuilding and muscle optimization, lurking on deep dark forums of all these different websites of the different biologics and materials people would use. And I couldn't afford most of that. I was like a literally poor college student. I had creatine and many cans of tuna fish and the cheapest steak I could find at Rosar's. And, my wife would laugh at me while I'd mix up, 4 tuna fish cans with some relish for lunch and, just tons of eggs for breakfast. And I found the whole like human optimization side of things super fascinating though. And when I opened my first gym up in Washington State, I really took a little bit more of like a technical approach to it. So we had one of the first platelet-rich plasma machines for joint injection. My partner was a sports medicine doc, so I had a physician on staff. And we had high-speed video cameras for both underwater and dry land gait analysis, swim analysis, bike analysis. We had indirect calorimetry machines, which are now like the size of your palm, but back then, massive boxes with a tube and a mask that you wear to measure oxygen consumed, carbon dioxide produced to give you a reading of how many calories you're burning at rest and during exercise, and then what proportion of those carbohydrates, what's fat, approximation of protein. And so I found and still find a lot of these toys just absolutely fascinating when it comes to human performance and health optimization. But it started off as an interest in fitness and how can we get more out of the body. And now if you look at biohacking, which is technically the use of technology and self-quantification to get the body to do something more efficiently or more quickly than it might be able to do in its native state, we have a lot of those tools. And I would throw like red light, PEMF, oxygen, any of these number of tools that a lot of people might see used quite frequently, like the longevity and anti-aging sectors, as being one version of biohacking. And then there's like putting collagen in your lasagna is also biohacking now. So the term is pretty broad, but my interest in it was originally just basically based on how can you get the most out of the human machine from a performance and recovery standpoint.
As you look at the long arc of it over the past couple of decades, what do you see as the huge milestones for the movement that have actually been durable?
I think probably the rise back to podcasting and and information dissemination becoming so much more widely available and cheap and readily accessible. The rise of what we might call like public health or public science educators, in the form of I would say guys like Dave Asprey. He was one of the OG guys that really made this popularity in podcasting. He does, yeah. And he's prolific as far as his books, his article. He was one of the original podcasters as well in the space. And now we have really popular people like Andrew Huberman, and Brian Johnson, and even if you look at a lot of the popular doctors or medical podcasts, a lot of them are alluding to different variants of biohacking as well. Guys like Peter Attia, for example. So I think a big part of it has been these voices that are making what seemed pretty fringe back in the day, like, I don't know, like getting to sleep better by having your lights at eye view or lower than eye view as sunset would have been for ancestral humankind, and eliminating all blue light spectrum from those lights. You would have gotten laughed at, right? If you would have told your friend at a party, 10 years ago that you were doing that to optimize sleep. And now it's kind of like, a shrug and, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
Simulate sunset. All right. Well, I've heard that 10 times on all sorts of different podcasts and read it in a few New York Times bestselling books now. So I would say that a lot of these modern educators have been big influences on biohacking, no longer being like laying in a medical bed getting chlorophyll injected into your eyeballs for night vision.
Right. In terms of the big elements, though, just taking care of yourself, it's still primarily sleep and diet and exercise, right?
The big ones are sleep, movement. I like to say movement, not exercise, because if you look at it, it is a sort of ancestral mismatch, right? We live in this odd era in which we have 24/7 access to hyper palatable foods, but yet we still have the same biological evolutionary mechanisms of calorie conservation, right? Our bodies want to stock away calories in case there's a famine or some other epic scenario that we have to survive.
Yeah.
And so we fabricate these boxes that we go into to pick things up and set them down multiple times and, and walk without getting anywhere. And that's formal exercise. But the reason I say movement is I like to try to convince people to just fabricate their entire lives to be movers rather than feeling like, well, to burn calories, you have to go into a special, box. But yeah, movement, sleep, nutrition, those would be the biggies that are apparent. But then if you look at, for example, Harvard's longest running study on longevity, which started back in the 30s with a group of men and followed them through life, once isolating for all confounding variables, including sleep and movement and food, the number one factor most associated with longevity was the extent of meaningful relationships and love in your life.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Deborah and I love to do is just start out every morning with a long walk in the neighborhood. Hopefully you get
my wife and I have been doing that every morning since we've been here.
Yeah, just hitting the hills, and there's nothing like it's not high strain, but it's just a great time to catch up, and you do get the heart rate up.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, it's the undulation is good for kind of scattering the stimulus across multiple muscle groups and also getting the heart rate up and down. It's kind of built-in interval training. And I mean, the spirituality piece, of course, is part of the relationships piece, right? Because relationships is relationships with others and relationships with your relationship with God. Mm-hmm. And so those two feed on each other pretty well also.
Yeah.
But those would be the biggies that are like the core foundational principles that, of course, are, I would say, far more important than any biohack.
Yeah. Do you feel like humanity has evolved pretty well with this knowledge to live healthier lives, or are we still learning that? Like it's kind of confounding, right? Because the data, like Jason Karp was in the podcast, and we were at that beautiful wedding, Lincoln and Julie's wedding.
Yeah.
Jason on episode 3, he was pretty, honest about the fact that American health has been kind of declining. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of a weird time because like our knowledge has never been higher in terms of how to be healthy and how to be happy, but yet there's kind of a downturn.
Yeah.
In terms of our longevity.
I think that from a psychological standpoint, it's very easy to engage in massive amounts of information consumption without application.
Right.
I think that's a big part of it. And I think that there's also potential for a lot of confusion and lack of clarity, which I think is almost paralytic for a lot of people. Back to the public health educators, there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of it, frankly, is monetizable and easily prone to bias. So people get the keto and the carnivore and the vegan and the high rep, low weight, high weight, low rep, and all sorts of different principles thrown at them, and you can get paralysis by analysis. It is interesting, though. There's almost like this fringe of very, very healthy people who are seemingly almost obsessed with longevity and anti-aging and biohacking and just general human optimization. But as a whole, I think we're still struggling, as a country and I think possibly even as a world, just because of, back to what I mentioned earlier, the ancestral mismatch, right? The idea that we live in an era in which we've got the same old biology that we've had for a very long time, but now that biology is not only not exposed to a very, very high amount of readily accessible calories, but also all the blessings of the post-industrial era in which we are able to make money and fulfill Maslow's hierarchy generally without needing to move as much, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got sedentary positions. We've got a host of toxins in the chemical soup that we're in that we have no way biologically evolved to deal with. I mean, all the way down to just like the electrical soup that we live in, right? Yeah. When we are exposed to that amount of electrical pollution, there is an upregulation of calcium influx into the cells via these voltage-gated calcium channels. When your cells are in a state of like constant mild polarization like that, you essentially have an electrochemical gradient that is keeping the cell in a mild state of activation, a mild state of like sympathetic nervous system fight or flight activation. And we're, human beings, of course, we've always been stressed out in some way, right? Like we've traded the diseases of our ancestors for diseases of modernity. So whereas in the past we would have struggled with famine or disease or being eaten by whatever, a saber-toothed tiger or chased by a Viking invader, now we've got obesity and diabetes and being chased by microplastic invaders, right? So it's a whole different set of issues that we struggle with, but we really are not able to deal with a lot of these issues of modernity that effectively yet. I don't think, and part of that is just education, right? It's changing our environment, and it's changing our eating habits, and it's changing our movement habits, and that's difficult when it is easy to just sit and make money and open the refrigerator and get food and rinse, wash, and repeat.
Yeah, and in terms of your own views, I mean, I was reading that that you've moderated quite a bit over time from more extreme diets to So how would you describe those, and specifically, for people listening to this, what would you say? Like, here's what really matters.
I'll give you two examples. So of course, as I alluded to, after racing Ironman for so long and being in the bodybuilding industry, after Ironman, I raced for 4 years professionally in Spartan and obstacle course racing. I would definitely classify myself as an over exerciser. And of course, I would never want to make people feel guilty about moving. But this is why it's also important to draw a distinction between exercise and movement. If you look at the most up-to-date research on exercise, there is a Goldilocks zone. There's a law of diminishing return. What that means is that once you exceed about 75 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise per week and about 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week, you see an increase in arterial stiffness and in atherosclerosis, probably because of the inflammatory cascade that results in cholesterol being more prone to plaque deposition in coronary tissue. That might seem like not very much time to a lot of people, but you of course have to define terms. So when I say vigorous exercise, this means like lung sucking, smoke coming out your ears, the taste of blood in your mouth, the typical CrossFit workout.
Right.
And frankly, there are some people still doing like 4 to 5 CrossFit workouts a week, or the WOD, or F45 or whatever it's called, these different high intensity interval training routines, which once you exceed about 75 minutes per week of that results in increased risk of mortality, not decreased. And then the 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise, this is also important to define, because there's this term that a lot of people are using or familiar with now called zone 2 cardio. You've probably heard of it. It's basically this idea that if you exercise in your aerobic zone, you're not creating enough damage and inflammation that you can't recover from that exercise session, but you're still getting a good improvement in stimulation of new mitochondria, burning some calories, increasing VO2 max, increasing overall cardiovascular fitness. Zone 2 is not what I would consider to be part of that moderate intensity 150-minute limit of moderate exercise. The 150-minute moderate exercise would be like the frowny faced person you pass on the walking path in the morning who's training for a marathon every single morning, or the person who's just like jamming at a pretty high heart rate on the elliptical trainer for 45 minutes a day at the gym. This would be above the aerobic zone and kind of getting into mild anaerobic territory, right? The lungs are burning, you're not quite all out vigorous, but it's still pretty hard. Anybody who's trained for a triathlon or a marathon or a half marathon or a cycling race or anything like that crosses over that 150 minutes pretty frequently. And zone 2 would not count for that. So when I probably walk about 15,000 steps a day on my treadmill, and it's all with my Bluetooth remote on my computer, reviewing slides or reading articles or talking on the phone or doing a Zoom call or sometimes even podcasting. All of that is fine, right?
That's super low intensity.
Right, it's super low intensity, and it's very similar to what our ancestors might have experienced while hunting, gathering, foraging, Some people are like, well, you hunt for 8 hours a day when you go hunting. That's ancestral. How come our ancestors weren't dying of atherosclerosis from hunting? Anybody who's hunted, I'm a bow hunter, knows that it's very infrequent bouts of like sprinting up a hill really quickly or crawling under a log or over a log, and then most of the rest of it is walking really, really slowly with a little bit of a load, and then sitting for long periods of time in between. Same for gardening or foraging or anything else. So training for a marathon is not the equivalent of our ancestors hunting.
Right.
Walking on your treadmill while you're working, maybe a little bit more. So coming full circle, as I learned about this research on the law of diminishing return or the Goldilocks zone of exercise, I've adjusted quite a bit. A lot of what I do is short, brief bursts of sprinting, lifting heavy things every once in a while, and walking and moving a lot. Just staying on my feet a lot. Sitting to eat, sitting when on an airplane, sitting occasionally for a podcast, and besides that, just moving the body.
Yeah.
And if the way I like to think about this is you should fabricate your day and modify your office in such a manner that hitting the gym at the beginning or the end of the day is an option, not a necessity. And that might be if you pull-up bars sprinkled in doorways around the house and a kettlebell on the floor of the office and a walking treadmill. And it's kind of like looking at life through this lens of not needing the gym to actually stay fit, and instead fabricating your life in such a way that you can be fit. So that's one big modification for me, is the realization that more is not better when it comes to exercise, and more intensity is not better when it comes to exercise. And you should just move at a low intensity throughout the day and occasionally push. Another example would be, and I think a lot of people have probably also heard this, the whole idea that glucose and carbohydrates are really, really bad. There's a lot of people that are carb phobic because of that. And I was a huge part of the whole ketogenic movement back in the day. I mean, all the way down to where, I was one of the athletes who was in the test that kind of rewrote the physiology textbooks on carb and fat utilization. Meaning that University of Connecticut, they did this study where they took, and this is not just applicable to athletes, this is applicable to everybody listening. They took a group of athletes and had them follow a standard carbohydrate enriched, whatever the Gatorade Sports Science Institute and the FDA recommends for average carbohydrate intake, which is generally around 50 to 80%, depending on which rule you're following, but a high amount of carbohydrates. The whole idea of like eat a diet with the base of the food pyramid being lots of whole grains and rice and pasta. And then they had another group of athletes follow a much more low carb and arguably ketogenic diet. So restriction of carbohydrates to the extent to where you're burning so much fat that you're not only burning fat as a fuel, but you're generating ketone bodies as a byproduct of that. And these are very stable fuel for the brain, the heart, the liver, the diaphragm, so much that, in fact, in someone with a neurological disorder, let's say like epilepsy, for example, those individuals respond very well to a ketogenic approach just because it's such a stable fuel. And there is far less oxidation, especially in neural tissue, when you're burning ketones instead of glucose. Okay. The group of athletes who followed the ketogenic low carb diet and the other group of athletes, we all went to the lab after about a year, and they had us go through a battery of tests, the guillotine-like needles that went into the quads to take out muscle tissue. So basically muscle biopsy, fat biopsy, VO2 max test, 3 hours of running on a treadmill while staring at a white wall in a lab with a mask on your face and a needle at your arm. Long story short is that the people who followed the carbohydrate restricted diet, we wound up burning an average of 1.5 grams of fat per minute during exercise. Up to that point, it was thought that about the maximum you could burn during exercise was about 1 gram of fat per minute. So this proved that you could literally turn the body into a fat burning machine based on the fuel substrate that you gave the body. So the idea is that the human body has a great deal of plasticity. It will adapt to the macronutrient that you give it. And if you give it a high amount of fats versus carbohydrates, it learns how to burn fats efficiently. And from a health standpoint, that would be important because you've got less glycemic variability, less surges in blood glucose during the day. And by controlling blood glucose surges during the day, you have more stable energy levels, lower amounts of inflammation, cholesterol becomes less prone to oxidation, and you just become more metabolically efficient. So after
and it's the right types of fats, or
the right types, we're not talking about
I assume that
supersized meal, throw away the buns,
a lot of avocado stuff.
Healthy Mediterranean style fats, not a high amount of processed fats, definitely not a lot of heated seed oils. And it makes sense that would be a stable source of fuel. And the issue is, and this happens a lot in the nutrition world, is if you go for the baby talk, yes, no, black, white, all or nothing type of approach, you can end up doing harm to the body. So even though, I and many others would have very stable energy levels on this ketogenic low carb diet, if you restrict glucose long term, and especially if you're a physically active person, restricting carbohydrates to like 10% of your total dietary intake, what happens is you can get thyroid dysregulation because you need a certain amount of glucose. It's almost like sending your body a little bit of a starvation signal. So I experienced this, basically the equivalent of hypothyroidism, like very, very high thyroid stimulating hormone, which meant my brain was trying to send a message to my thyroid gland to make more thyroid, and I just didn't have enough carbohydrates to go around. Basically hypogonadism, very, very low amounts of testosterone, joint pain because of not enough glucose being present for what's called the proteoglycan foundation of the joints, and general levels of like low mood, lethargy, poor sleep, because carbohydrates are used for serotonin, which can get converted into melatonin. And so this idea of like, running away from carbohydrates and really restricting carbohydrates and, putting on what's the thing that they give to dogs? Your muzzle when you walk past an Italian restaurant. It turns out that that's really not good for you long term. And so another example of a change that I've made is I'm pretty flexible now when it comes to dieting. I'm aware of the amount of carbohydrates that I eat. I wear this blood glucose monitor to keep track of how much my blood glucose is going up and down. But what I do now is I don't eat that much sugar or that many carbohydrates most of the day. And then at the end of the day, I pretty much eat carbs ad libitum. It stocks away muscle and liver glycogen for the next day, gives your thyroid gland what it needs. So you see a up in testosterone, you see better sleep because you get more serotonin. And that's another thing that I've definitely changed. Those are two examples. Over exercising and excessive restriction of carbohydrates are two things that I think a lot of people still might be tempted or prone to do if they're in the health optimization field. But there's a lot more to the story than just exercising a lot and not eating carbs.
Yeah, I think correct me if I'm wrong on this, because you would by far and away be the expert on it, but it also depends on the types of carbohydrates, because I remember that documentary Fed Up. Do you remember that documentary? Yeah. Oh my gosh. That was that documentary for me was so maddening, because it was really like, as an American public, we were manipulated into thinking that it was all about low fat.
Right.
And they just jacked up our foods with tons and tons of sugars.
Right. Tons of sugars and the wrong kinds of fats. Yeah, you're right. The type of carbohydrate matters. The idea that certain carbohydrates are broken down more slowly and cause a more stable glucose response is a thing, and slow carbohydrates that are higher in fiber, let's say like oatmeal versus like white potato or something like that. There is a difference.
Right.
And there's a difference, and this is important too. This is a big part of the whole nutrition world, the idea of biochemical individuality, meaning that when we have different sizes of our pancreas and our stomach and our spleen and our liver and different vitamin D excretion rates and a host of different needs and tendencies based on largely our genetics. And there was a fascinating study done several years ago in which they found very individualized blood glucose responses to the consumption of bananas and cookies. This was, I think it was called the Day 2 experiment. And it turned out this was all based on the bacterial composition of the gut. And this is why there are certain bacterial strains now being sold for appetite control or blood glucose regulation. Like an example would be Akkermansia, right? That's advertised as like a GLP-1 like probiotic because of the satiety that it can induce. And other probiotics will have like a blood glucose stabilizing effect. And all of that's just based on treating the biome to change and thus altering the way that you metabolize carbohydrates. If it's so individualized, though, I think that makes a pretty good case for self-quantifying as much as you're able to, right? Like the blood glucose monitor, you used to have to get a prescription for it based on having diabetes or some sort of blood glucose dysregulation. Now you can just get a blood glucose monitor, wear it, see what your personal adaptation to carbohydrates is, your personal response to carbohydrates is. And when I wear this, I pay less attention to the average blood glucose during the day, meaning I don't freak out too much whether it's 85 or 90 or 95, for example. And I pay more attention to two things. One, how often is the blood glucose fluctuating during the day? So that's called the glycemic variability. And number two, how quickly does it return to baseline after eating? That's basically your postprandial blood glucose response. So if my blood glucose goes up to like 130 after I have a meal, I prefer for it to like be back down to my resting value, say 90, within a couple hours after that meal. And both of those are pretty good measures of a good amount of metabolic stability. When it comes to this whole idea of biochemical individuality and self-quantification, I mean, it's not just glucose. I mean, there's so many other things that will affect this, like back to the fat thing, right? The ketogenic diet that would have helped your neighbor lose 10 pounds might be highly inflammatory for you or undigestible for you because of liver and gallbladder bile production, or the ApoE gene that might predispose you to a dementia-like condition from high intake of saturated fats, or the vitamin D supplement, that's just working wonderfully for a whole bunch of people, might be toxic or at least pull calcium into your vasculature for you because you have low vitamin D excretion rates, right? And so if you can do, some kind of genetic test, blood tests, preferably like a stool test to look at your microbiome, salivary hormone analysis or a urinary hormone analysis, and a decent testing of like your immune response to different foods, you've then got like a pile of data, and you can step back and look at that and say, okay, so this is how I should eat. This is how I should supplement. In many cases, this is how I should train. And so it's pretty easy it's much, much easier now than it would have been 20 years ago to be pretty precise without spending too much money on your training and your diet.
How do you kind of operationalize your knowledge, which is vast at this point? I mean, you've been at it for so long, with your own family, like with your sons and with your wife.
Yeah, there's certainly truth to the saying that the shoemaker's wife wears no shoes. My wife,
your wife is in incredible shape, though.
Yeah, she's in great. She's like she's got like the hardcore lean mean Montana rancher genes, and she grew up as an athlete. Ran track and field and ran the 800 and the 1500, arguably two pretty painful races. So her threshold for exercise is pretty high. And also just by the nature of her growing up like on a farm, once her family moved from Montana on a farm in Idaho, she makes clothes and furniture from scratch, and she's a real homemaker and a tough cookie. Yet if I start talking about anything related to like hormone optimization, or babe, you should look into whatever progesterone, or anything like that, I usually need to leave a good book out that she checks out, or connect her with a friend who she'll actually listen to. So I try not to bug my wife too much about health, but occasionally she's interested in something I'm doing, and she'll go along for the ride. My
like
sons,
a wise husband.
Yeah, exactly. My sons, there's certain things that I knew would be good for them that I pushed them into at an early age. cold exposure was one. Like they were just out in the ice in the cold doing plunges with dad when they were 3 years old, which is great because I think if a young human grows up with a pretty good ability to handle thermal stress, they've got an advantage psychologically because you learn to deal with that through breath and through mental reframing. Same thing with the sauna. I mean, when they were 6 years old, we were doing hour-long, nearly holotropic breathwork sessions in the sauna. And I would keep a pretty close eye on them and look at their skin coloration and, how they were dealing with it and make sure they were well hydrated. We did a lot of thermal stress, a lot of training with strangely shaped weights like kettlebells, sandbags, each other, just helping them learn how to move unwieldy objects just to develop a little bit of what we might call like farmer strength. We taught them how to cook with random ingredients that we'd find around the kitchen, basically the equivalent of cooking from scratch at an early age, starting with scrambled eggs and moving on to, helping mom and dad with roast chicken and steak and salads. And now every night at our house, everybody's contributing to dinner and they've got a healthy relationship with like what real whole food that's unprocessed actually looks like because they grew up cooking. And then a lot of nature time. I mean, they've been going to wilderness survival school since they were 6 years old. They're now mentors at that school. They've both done a 10-day vision quest out in the North Idaho wilderness, 3-day rite of passage when they went from childhood into adolescence. They studied the Kamana course, which is basically like bird language, animal tracking, nature immersion. So I think the big ones that we implemented with them intentionally from a pretty early age were thermal stress, lifting weird things, being outside a lot, and having a really healthy relationship with food. When it comes to the edgier stuff, which would probably be like biohacking and supplements, right? Those are two biggies that I get a lot of questions about. Like, when do you put your kids in the red light bed? When do you test them and give them their own personalized supplementation protocol? Those are things that I'm a little bit more lenient on, meaning we have all the technologies at our house, but I don't push my sons in any of that because they will figure out technology pretty quickly. Same reason that we were late adopters with the smartphones and computers and focus more on nature immersion because we knew that kids would pick that stuff up pretty quickly once they got their hands on it. So now if my sons get injured playing lacrosse or jiu-jitsu or tennis or whatever, like they'll jump in the red light bed or throw a PEMF pad on their shoulder or whatever, but we didn't do a lot of that at an early age. And then with supplements, the mindset that I think you can create in a young person when it comes to the idea that you can pop a pill to achieve the goal that you want is something that I think you run a pretty high risk of producing. So same thing with supplementation. I focused really mostly on whole food for them, with the exception that, and this is controversial a little bit for some people, I think, but I don't look on genetic testing as like a doom scroll of all the things that you're going to die from, but rather as knowledge that you can empower yourself with of certain tendencies that you have that you might be able to patch up a little bit with targeted supplementation or lifestyle adjustments. So they both have really, really sluggish glutathione production pathways and a high propensity for not being able to deal with toxins very well. And they're both like, if they walk into a room that's been painted, for example, like they both notice it super duper fast. They pick up on chemicals really quickly, almost like a canary in a coal mine. So they both take glutathione. Another example would be they, and I have this too, naturally produce low levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is important for neuronal growth. So they take lion's mane mushroom extract, they do the sauna, they do aerobic exercise, some of the things that help with BDNF. And the last one that they've done, and these are all since they were about 10, is they have inefficient pathways for creating vitamin D from exposure to sunlight. So they also supplement with vitamin D. So there's a few choice supplements that they do just based on genetics, but they're not, like taking massive amounts of like muscle building supplements,
right,
and multivitamins and things like that. So yeah, a lot of the knowledge we just, Mom and I try to be a good example, and things get passed down organically to them. But those are some of the things we actually focused on intentionally.
Yeah. What do you think about the GLP-1 movement? I mean, it's such a big business,
right? And This is something that I think, especially in the world of fitness, there's a lot of pushback on. It's like, well, it's kind of like testosterone. It's like, I'm working so hard. How is it that you could just, smear a little testosterone cream on your scrotum and get just as big muscles as I have with me going to the gym, an hour a day? Or, I'm working so hard not to overeat calories, and yet you're injecting this GLP-1, and now all of a sudden you're losing more weight than me. It seems we like to think that blood, sweat, and tears are how you actually get what you want, and it seems unfair that you could use better living through science to get some of these goals. That being said, with GLPs, if you look at what would be called the pleiotropic, like the system-wide effects of a GLP, whether it's, they have some now that act on, retatrutide is 3 different pathways, GLP, ghrelin, and one other. Tirzepatide is 2 different pathways. Some of the early ones were 1 pathway. But even the earlier ones, you see a decrease in neural inflammation. You see improvements in appetite control. You see a really big impact on lipids, like drop in triglycerides, in some cases drop in ApoB and Lp(a), sometimes drop in LDL. So there are a lot of things downstream that happen with these GLPs that I think make them a pretty intriguing compound for like a general system-wide approach to metabolic longevity or metabolic health in general. The issue is that if you go to your doctor and you get a prescription for a GLP, you're getting a preloaded pen with a preloaded dose, and that preloaded dose is, in my opinion, too high. Shuts down appetite. Have you ever taken a GLP?
I haven't.
Okay.
No.
I tried,
but I do have friends that have had a pretty radical change.
Oh yeah,
like people that just were chronically overweight for as long as I've known them.
Yep.
And now they've got a new lease on life.
Yeah, it shuts down food noise.
I have seen some friends though that have done it and then bounced back to high weight.
That's an issue with
as
GLPs,
soon as they stop. Yep.
Especially the higher doses. So when you inject a standard dose of a GLP, you become basically like nauseous around food, even a lot of your favorite foods. You simply don't want to eat, period. And then you hear the general advice that, well, if you're going to take a GLP, make sure you eat adequate protein, make sure you hit the weights. It's one thing to say that. It's another thing to sit down to like the juiciest, best, cut of ribeye ever and just not want to touch it, or make your favorite, whatever, peanut butter chocolate Reese's peanut butter cup whey protein smoothie, and you sit down and you just like don't want to drink any of it. And then you go to the gym and you feel super flat because you don't have any calories, you don't have any energy, and it creates this negative feedback loop. And when you pair that with the slowing of gastric motility, right, so you got constipation, typically some gastric inflammation, you see a loss of muscle tissue, you see a loss of cardiac tissue, which is obviously not that great for overall longevity. There are a host of issues with a standard dose of a GLP to where I am not a fan of that. But if you can work with a compounding pharmacist, and even though this is on the fringes of risk, depending on where you get a GLP, even like getting one of these like sold for human research only, peptide companies version of a GLP, and you inject about 1/10 of a standard dose, a microdose of a GLP, you get a mild quieting of food noise, and you get a lot of these improvements in lipids and neural inflammation, et cetera. But it's not so intense that you start to waste away, that you get nauseous, that you get some of the depression and constipation and gastric issues and all the other things that go along with the standard dose. For example, in the health and fitness world right now, it's very common for people to be doing like a 3 times a week injection of retatrutide, which is one of the GLPs that acts on 3 different pathways. And they're injecting about 0.25 milligrams of it, whereas a standard dose would be 2.5 milligrams, like 1/10 of a standard dose. I've tried that, and it actually works really well. I'm so lean anyways, I shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a GLP,
right?
Because I have to eat like a horse just to maintain weight. That's just my metabolism. And I also tried like the standard dose of a GLP, and I was miserable for like a week after 1 injection. So I think the dose is almost like the poison when it comes to GLPs. I think they're a great drug, and they're very useful for like overweight, obesity, appetite control, etc. But the higher the dose, I think the more risks that you tend to see. And then there's what you just alluded to, like the bounce back in weight once you stop. Like there's kind of like two theories. One is, well, you use these as training wheels to understand what it feels like to not be hungry. And then once you stop using them, you understand, okay, so I didn't have to eat. That was just mostly psychological. And now I understand that and I can control myself a little bit better. And then there's the other camp that's basically, well, once you take away that thing that was quieting food noise, you just come back like a roaring lion, just even worse than before. And I think that might also be dose related, because I didn't notice any type of like a surge in appetite when I quit doing a microdose of retatrutide, and I did it for like 8 weeks.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah, I mean, it seems incredibly revolutionary, but it's I mean, it's huge business. It's one of those where it seems like if you go on it, you just need to plan to stay on it.
Yeah.
If you don't have the willpower to change your diet.
That's what like testosterone is like too, right? Like if you're a man and you want that cheat code on life, which I think if you're done having kids and it's dosed properly and you're working with some type of lab that's going to test you every quarter to make sure you're not creating excess estrogen or DHT for hair loss or something like that, that it's a good idea. But you do have to understand that once you start it, like it's really difficult to come off it. Mm-hmm. You're probably accepting the fact that you're going to be on it for life.
All right, so all of that is like super helpful, and really appreciate the information, and hopefully people get a lot out of that. I want to shift to really the thesis for Love Conquers Fear and this moment that we're in for humanity. How do you view this moment? And you've listened to the podcast, so you know my general thesis, but I really view the next 10 to 15 years as the most fateful time for humanity in existence. I mean, we're in the exponential curves, and definitely taking care of ourselves and is a huge aspect of it. And part of my thesis in my book that I just concluded, handed to the publisher, now I'm in that painful editing process, is the inner journey, the importance of the inner journey to really strengthen ourselves for not just what is here today, but what's to come.
Yeah.
I'm just curious how you think about this moment.
I mean, there's a lot happening right now.
Yeah, sure.
In a way, I'm not sure how much of it is new. It's a little bit difficult to say, having not lived through past periods of history where there's been massive changes, right? From the horse and buggy to the car, or from the sword to the gun, or any other big movement that we've had. I like to think that that the human race is pretty adaptable, and that
for sure
we will figure out new ways to harness our inborn creativity, even if things change in a pretty dramatic way in terms of how we're working, and perhaps even like the environments that we're living in. I don't really foresee there being like some kind of an apocalyptic scenario. I would hope that we would be entering into more of an age of, I think I even heard you call it abundance
for all.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I guess the part about the inner journey really resonates with me. I mean, the way I interpret that, and I'm not sure if this is what you mean by it, is basically a little bit similar to what we were talking about earlier about relationships, right? Relationships with others, our spiritual fitness, the way that we, I suppose, like brace ourselves spiritually for the change, and also the way in which we build our communities and our neighborhoods and our families in such a way that there's a lot of tight bonds there. I'm not sure what is going to look like, but we certainly do a lot at our house when it comes to tending for our spirits and tending for our community. We can get into the brass tacks of that if you want.
Yeah, sure.
When I was about 34 years old, I was to the point where I'd kind of built the fitness empire and the health empire, and was traveling around the world, speaking at a lot of the conferences, and I had been named as America's top personal trainer, and was doing the races. I was well respected. I was making money, and I was not really present in my community. I was not a present father, husband. My wife and I nearly got divorced. I mean, I almost lost, paradoxically, like everything that I was working for. Almost like using work as a noble excuse to escape, convincing myself I was like slaying dragons and bringing home the bacon for the family or sending the check home at least. But my wife was like, it was almost to the point where it was like she was raising our twin sons on her own. And it took that that thing that almost like really rocked my world to make me realize how important family and relationships and legacy actually are. And for us, that culminated in me doubling down on family. I mean, we have a family huddle every single morning at 7 a.m. like clockwork. We all gather, and it has been everything from meditation and breathwork and journaling to reading scripture to praying together. We all talk about our day and who's got the car where and who's bringing what to dinner. And we even like huddle up and clap like a football team after it all goes down. Because I think a lot of families are like ships, passing in the night if you just start the day without a formal coming together. And it's also a good leash for me from a work standpoint, because I get up early to work, but I know that 7 a.m. come hell or high water, like I got to be in the living room with the family. Similarly, in the evening, 7 p.m., I have to have everything shut down, because like clockwork again, we all gather as a family. We sing a song together, we pray together, we talk about the day. We've had a father-son book club since my sons were 6, and we talk about the chapter of the book that I've chosen for that month. We all go through that. And then we drag out whatever everybody's made for dinner, and we go up to the game closet and we play games for like an hour and a half. This is almost every single night at our house. Like people come over to hang out, and they're like, oh, you didn't have to like throw a big party or do this big gathering for us. And we're like, no, this is like what we do every night. Like just a big family gathering and family party. We schedule twice a month one-on-one date nights with each of the kids, twice a month date nights for me and my wife. Like you guys, we do a lot of walking and movement together. And then we also make our house a gathering place, and our gathering place, our intention as a family is we want our home to be open to anyone. So it's like the island of misfit toys. It's like the massage therapist and the barista and some celebrity who's in town and a couple of entrepreneurs, and we bring everybody together for a dinner party, and that's typically twice a month. I even ride my bike through a neighborhood, and I put flyers in the mailboxes of every street up and down our neighborhood, and the neighbors come over. And so we've built this togetherness as a family, and then also as a community. And then finally, a big part of it has been legacy building. Meaning we sat down as a family about 8 years ago, and we wrote down all of the values that our family holds dear. Things like love, transparency, gratitude, leadership. And then like a business would create a business branded mission statement. We then form those values into a mission statement, and that hangs on our living room wall. And then we took all of that and created a graphic representation of it and formed a family crest, and had a metal worker create this family crest that shows everything our family holds dear. You have like the quadrant that shows creativity, and the quadrant that shows community, and a quadrant that shows adventure and exercise, and another quadrant that has each of our spirit animals traveling through the universe together, all surrounded by these stones. And there's 4 of our different symbols for each of the family members. I'm a tree, my wife is a seed, my son River is waves of water, my son Taryn is a leaf. And if you look closely at the stones that are surrounding the crest, each of our family symbols are embossed in those stones. And whenever a grandchild or great-grandchild is added to the family, we'll emboss their insignia into each of those stones. And so the story of that crest is in the book, but all of our traditions are also in the book. What we do for Thanksgiving, for Easter, for Christmas, for any of the major holidays that we celebrate, the different rites of passage and at what age those occur for each of the Greenfield children are, and this is a powerful thing for the children, especially our obituaries, our end of life wishes, how we want to memorial service to look. Obituary. Everything is in there. So it's a it's about a little over 100 pages long. and I will be able to hand this book to my sons so they can go forward with that handbook of like generational values and legacy and meaning and what it actually means to be a Greenfield in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And they can take that and build upon that with their family. And so legacy has been a big part of that as well. But when you talk about something like, the coming age and also the inner journey, for me, I feel confident that we can handle that as a family, just based on the community that we've built around us, the legacy that we've woven into the family, and then also just our intense togetherness and transparency that we have because of all these daily, weekly, monthly, annual comings and goings that we do as a family.
Yeah. I think you're already living the model that I would espouse. Because it is, there is this level of us being under assault right now with just algorithmic manipulation from the media, getting us to think that we're living in a dystopia, all the toxins being put in our food, the pharmaceutical complex, which is keeping us in some state of addiction.
Right. Addiction and also addiction, learned helplessness, and almost a state of mild lethargy in which we are a little bit more manipulatable, which I think a lot of pharmaceuticals actually do, just mildly on the side.
Right.
And I'm not sure that there's evil intention behind that, besides, or that that's just, that's people's reaction to something that they're taking. It's a side effect.
Right.
It's certainly useful when it comes to manipulation of a society.
I mean, inherent in the name of the project is what humanity has to do, which is we have to get to a point where we allow love to conquer our own fear, and then we can radiate more love in the world, and we can help others do the same. And you're being a great example in your own community, and to other parents. That's very inspiring to me as well.
Yeah. I think it's important. And I mean, it's, a lot of people hear these things, but I think a big part is just the logistics of the application. Like, you literally have to take out the calendar and say, okay, so I'm going on a date night this night with child 1 and child 2 and child 3, a date night with the wife. And these are the 2 dates that I have available, a Friday, a Saturday, or a Sunday for a community party. And I'm going to start, a Contacts Plus or a sheet or just a plain old Google Doc or notes with a list of all the people I can invite to these parties, and start to map out the family values and put together a legacy handbook. I mean, it seems like a big task, but I think a lot of this stuff is fun. Like, it's fun to have people over for dinner, and it's fun to take your kids out for a day. It's fun to, have all the family sitting in the living room floor together in their pajamas and gathering together again in the evening. So it's a little bit of work, but I think it's one of the best things we can do.
It's a great habit.
Protect ourselves from a potentially, from a future that threatens to tear us apart in some ways.
Why do you think there's so much dystopia when it comes to AI? There's a major dystopian narrative out there that the machines are essentially going to take over. I actually think it's because it's been grafted in our human psyche by movies like The Matrix and The Terminator and on and on and on. There's the story of Gollum, being Jewish, where the Gollum was animated by the rabbi and then took over the synagogue and started destroying everything. That's a story that came out of Prague.
First of all, I am not convinced that anything like that is going to occur. And the idea of the matrix, or the amount of manipulation that may have extended or occurred in the past, to the extent to where we're actually in a simulation, that we're in a simulation now, I have a difficult time believing that. Maybe it's because, my background is Christianity, right? If anything, I think the simulation that we're in, if you want to call it that, is that there was an intelligent being that created the universe and planned a whole story for us ahead of time, and we're all living as characters in that story, yet somehow magically have our own free will. But I think that's a much more hopeful way to live than to think we're a bunch of chunks of flesh and blood in a very Darwinistic manner, just hurtling through space on a rock, trying to see who can survive and make the most kids or money or have the most homes or cars or whatever, and then it's game over. And it's also a much more hopeful way to live compared to thinking that we're this is all just a simulation. I think like the dystopia with the AI, I think you nailed it, that a big part of it is the narrative that we've just seen over and over again, in Hollywood, and now in a lot of the stories that a lot of people warning us about what the future of AI will become are saying.
A lot of it, Ben, though, is coming from the AI experts. And I would say, though, that this is just a thesis I have. I don't know this for a fact, but I can see it through their use of language. And I know a lot of AI experts myself. There's a huge Venn diagram overlap between AI experts that are concerned about dystopia and AI experts that have no spiritual core, from what I can tell, like no belief in anything spiritual, just completely atheistic.
Right.
And I think that if you just assume there's nothing beyond this world of form, and we're just here, and there's no purpose to anything, we just kind of make up our own narrative as we go about meaning, and there's no kind of world of love and light that our souls are in right now, that we actually have come from to have this physical experience, then it can take you into a nihilistic worldview pretty quickly.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you've probably heard the theory that the reason that we're seeing an increasing number of UFO or alien sightings is because they're concerned that we're going to wipe each other out.
Right.
And part of that might be driven by the surge in AI. Like before that, it was nuclear technology.
Right.
And that's what's going to somehow stop us or warn us. But again, I think that if you do believe in some source, some intelligence behind the universe, some origin of the universe that's outside of us, and that's greater than us, and that's arguably watching out for us, and that loves us and cares for us, then it's not, a gray man popping up here and there warning us. It's an actual being who understands what we're doing, who understands what the future could be, and who I don't think would allow machines to wipe us out.
Yeah. I mean, I very much believe in God. I would say that my interpretation of God is that it's beyond our understanding and knowing.
It has to be a God.
Right.
Or to be God.
Yeah. I mean, the science fiction novella I wrote, The Lattice, which I think you've read.
Yeah.
Covering the years 2030 through 2085. Even by 2085, we don't fully understand the nature of God. But we've seen the repeating pattern throughout space and time and throughout the universe that love had to get to the point where it conquered fear, so that we did not wipe ourselves out. Because we get to this point in any society around the universe where we got to a level of technological sophistication where creative potential was vast, but also our destructive potential is vast, because technology is always both sides of the coin.
But do you think that we've had a period in ancient history in which we reached a certain level of technological sophistication and somehow wiped ourselves out, or there was a great natural disaster that wiped all that out, and then we've started over since then, possibly multiple times?
Not that I know of on Earth, although there's theories around that. In The Lattice, what we find out is that once we get to the point where love has conquered our own fear, and we have an unbounded technological takeoff because humanity unites, we find out that other alien races throughout the universe have gotten to that same crescendo point, and had to get to the point where love conquered their own fear for them to take off. I mean, one of the challenges I have to the UFO narrative, for what it's worth, is that if there are aliens here and they come into our space, then that means that they had to get to the point where they probably conquered faster and light speed travel. And if they conquered faster and light speed travel, then they have faster and light speed weapons, if they chose to make them. And a faster and light speed weapon would take out the Earth faster than you and I could finish a word.
Right.
It would just be immediate.
Unless they're in the ocean already.
Right. And so that's the part where I have a challenge to it in terms of they had to, if they're here, they have to be here in some benevolent capacity to help us in some way, as opposed to be here to do devious things.
Yeah.
That's at least my theory. Not a very well formed theory, but
yeah, I would like to think that if they knew of our existence, that their intention wasn't to wipe us out. But yeah, I think, and this is a little bit of a twist on the alien idea, but I think a lot of what we see when it comes to paranormal activity, whether it's alien activity or ghost activity or UFO sightings or anything else, is an actual spiritual dimension. Mm-hmm. And that a portal has been opened in some way. And it's the same portal, I think, that we can cross into with the use of like entheogens. Mm-hmm. I think that the universal experience of certain entities, certain geometric patterns, even certain thought patterns, in some cases, traumatic experiences, a lot of what might occur when someone, says that they've been abducted, for example. I think a lot of that is spiritual and involves angels, involves demons, involves God, involves Satan. I think that if you look at the traditional use of plant medicines to cross over this portal to divine with the gods in some mm-hmm. way, or to divine with deceased human spirits of our ancestors or other reasons these would have been used, that's more of what we're seeing, or is what we're seeing, compared to extraterrestrial life when we're experiencing a lot of these. And I think that it's possible to experience those, as we've seen on perhaps like radars or in drug-free settings, outside of something like a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, I've definitely had experiences with psychedelics where I've had communion with the divine, and that's been transcendent for my life, for sure. Yeah. And I imagine you have too.
Yeah, I mean that's the saying, right? A lot of atheists will go into a plant medicine experience, but not a lot of atheists come out of a plant medicine experience.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've always believed in God as it was, but actually having a knowing, which is different than feeling it in prayer, which feeling in prayer can be very, very powerful.
Yeah. I think it is risky meditation, though. I think because of the nature of the spiritual beings that you might encounter in a state like that, and the unpreparedness of many individuals who might be experimenting with those type of protocols, mm-hmm. or the hidden motives of whoever might be sitting for a protocol like that, like let's say, whoever the shaman is for that there's a great deal of risk, because we're talking about compounds that traditionally would have been reserved for either the priesthood or very seldomly for like a rite of passage, not like, for a 48th trip to Peru to do yet another ayahuasca experience to find yourself.
It's like that biohacking video you shared with me where
exactly
the couple are talking, and she's like, and on my 750th ayahuasca journey.
The shaman Bob. Oh, Bob? Right. Bob's great. I think that the surge in availability and popularity of a lot of these experiences, with journeys, is something that we should actually be exercising great caution around. Mm-hmm. I actually quit talking much about things like that on my podcast about 8 years ago. When, after going through a pretty long and hefty series of different plant medicine experiences, realized that this is, for lack of a better phrase, like shit that we need to be very careful messing around with. Mm-hmm. And that if I, as a public figure, start lauding these compounds, then for every 9 people who go in and have a great experience, one's going to come out and have a nearly, schizophrenic type of, or even traumatic, mm-hmm. Almost I think potentially even almost like an entity on board type of experience that they come out with, some type of possession by either an entity or by whoever sat for a procedure like that, like a shaman, or just a great deal of confusion about, hey, was that a memory? I don't know if that was a memory. Did I experience that trauma? I'm not sure. Was that in the song I was listening to on the radio on my way to my journey? Like there's a lot that I think people don't understand that they need to be prepared for in something like that. And also a lot of people get hurt by it.
Matters a lot.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that done right and with great intentionality and in the right set and setting, it can be one of the most transcendent experiences people have ever had.
I think
I've seen it personally.
I have
not
too.
just for myself, but for friends that have done it with great intentionality.
My wife and I had some big breakthroughs in our relationship through experiences like that. I think back to the Everest analogy, you should climb Mount Everest before you get dropped off by a helicopter on top of Mount Everest. I even recently experienced this with Ibogaine. I was supposed to be doing Ibogaine like 3 weeks ago, and realized in the last couple of weeks after working with my coach on the phone and going through my list of intentions and my journal, that there was nothing on my list that I had yet made an attempt through fasting, through journaling, through isolation, through solitude, through prayer, through self-examination, and fully sober state to intentionally tackle. And I took the 6 days that I was going to be in Mexico to instead sit at home in my studio and in the lounge next to my office to journal and to write and to just go after all of these issues that I wanted to work on in a completely different space. And I actually, the way I approached it was as a sort of identity inversion, meaning that I would write down or journal about some aspect of myself that I had the intention to change. Let's say, like being less self-obsessed and being more interested in other people, understanding that everybody has a core desire to be seen and loved and heard, and walking through life with a greater awareness, just a subconscious awareness of that. And then I would invert that entire negative aspect of my personality into one positive word, in that case, kindness. And I came up with a list of 10 items: prayer, kindness, contentedness, love, trust, honor, abundance, obedience, intention, and courage as my theme for 2026. And this was all just based on 6 days of self-examination. Basically deferred the Ibogaine experience for a year because I wanted to climb the mountain before getting dropped off on top of it. And I think a lot more people, before they consider a plant medicine experience, should consider fasting, journaling, maybe some kind of a vision quest in the wilderness, and doing the work before popping the pill, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And, I spent a long time doing a lot of inner work before I ever did a psychedelic experience. Studied Vedanta for many years. Spent a lot of time like really just focused on health, focused on mental, strength. Really.
Which means you're going in more psychologically and spiritually prepared.
That's right.
Compared to the person who heard from their cousin that ayahuasca is cool and buys a plane ticket to Peru.
Yeah. And in terms of just your confidence that humanity is going to make it to this age of abundance for all, it sounds like you're pretty confident.
I'm very confident, but I think a great deal of that is tied to my religious beliefs.
Right.
So if you look at this from the perspective of my background, Christianity, there are different eschatological views in Christianity, meaning what we interpret as how the end times spoken of in, say, the book of Revelation in the Bible would actually look like. And there is basically a pre-millennial belief, and that essentially is based around the idea that the world is basically going to get worse and worse, and we are kind of sort of going to hell in a handbasket. And when things get really, really bad, and we're kind of like in a Mad Max type of scenario, that the heavens will open and the trumpets will sound and Jesus will come back and, take everybody to heaven. And that's basically after 1,000-year reign of Satan on earth. That's a premillennial standpoint. The postmillennial standpoint is that, and again, this is all based on Christianity, is that a Messiah came and conquered death, and that the world from that point on is going to get better and better and better. And our only job is to love others and love God. And that if we do so and fulfill what in the Bible would be called the Great Commission and fulfill those two greatest commandments of loving God and loving others, that the world will get better and better and better. And then eventually there will be a new heaven and a new earth, but it's not going to get really, really bad before that happens.
Yeah.
So just based on my religious convictions from a postmillennial standpoint, which is what I believe, I naturally operate with the idea that that everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
That things are going to get better and better.
Yeah, I'm tackling it from that perspective. I mean, I've studied tons of ancient scripture at this point, from the Tao Te Ching to the Bhagavad Gita, Buddhism to early Judaism, Kabbalah. I'm Jewish, but to early Christianity. And what I found is that they all sink at a common root, which is love is the answer, essentially.
Right.
That if humanity just becomes more loving, which is, again, where our souls already are. So just like a remembering of where we came from. And then we radiate that on earth, which is what Jesus did. And then treat each other with that level of kindness and love. As Byron Reese said on episode 12 of the podcast, all any individual needs to do is just treat each other with kindness, and we'll enter utopia. But then I take a techno-utopia view to it as well, because there's so many things that we look back on with shame or horror, like slavery, for example. And then we had the Industrial Revolution, and it made using human beings in that way completely irrelevant.
Right. And we have 1,000 mechanical Turks in our back pocket on a rectangle.
Exactly. And we're in this exponential curves right now. And, week of tech progress to me, as someone who's been programming since I was 7 years old, right now in 2025, the end of 2025, feels like a year of tech progress 10 years ago. And I think that several hours of tech progress 10 years from now is going to feel like a week today, like a year 10 years ago. And so we're going to have abundance around the world that we cannot imagine today. And, some people really push back on me with that. But what I remind them is that, you and I and everybody alive today listening to this has something called electricity. And that's only 0.1% of the entire existence of Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
We've been around for around 300,000 years. And, imagine how few of us have experienced the internet.
Yeah.
And now we have AI. And, your children, my children, they're going to kind of remember a world before AI, but not really, because they're really coming of age with it. And it's, 100 years from now, I cannot imagine what society is going to be like. The one thing that I know for a fact is that if you and I could jump into a time machine and go 100 years from now, we would view the people alive at that time with godlike capabilities. We would not even be able to imagine. Like they'd probably be able to sit in front of us and just fabricate something in their hands.
Right.
And we'd have no idea what's going on. And it'd be some kind of...
Or know what we were thinking before we said anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think the most important thing about your philosophy is that the love conquering fear must be based upon the existence of an intelligent being
Yes.
outside of us who is a source or an example of what absolute love looks like.
For sure.
I think that human beings in and of ourselves are incapable of pure and perfect love.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you see that if you look at an attempt to create a society void of religion, void of spirituality, void of God, but
Right.
dependent upon almost like a socialistic or a near communistic assumption that people are all going to do good things for each other when left to our own volition.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we must have some source of absolute truth and that example of perfect love in our lives for that conquering of fear to actually happen.
For sure.
Like I think that is the most important thing.
I think this is a huge area where what you talk about out there and what I talk about has a huge overlap, which is we both agree that a strong spiritual core is absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
And that is actually what our reality is. You know, the hardest chapter and the most ambitious chapter of the book that I just concluded writing is chapter 12 on what is our reality. And I break down a lot of ancient scripture. I break down quantum physics. I break down lots of different aspects of our reality to basically prove that we live in a reality that's deeply rooted in love and light. And once we have that awareness, and there's lots of different ways to get there, then it really transforms the way you live your life.
Yeah.
Because you can be in alignment with your soul.
Yeah.
And in alignment with the place that we actually come from.
Yeah.
From lifetime to lifetime.
Yeah.
So, you know, that spiritual core is a huge aspect. And one of the things that I don't think people see coming, that I see coming, I've been pretty good about predicting where tech's going to go for a long, long time, is that the acceleration with AI, quantum computing, robotics, brain-to-computer interfaces is actually going to lead us to understand what makes us most human. We're going to have more spiritual insight than we can even imagine today.
Do you think that's because that will draw us nearer to an understanding of where consciousness originates?
Yes, exactly. Consciousness is the unsolved frontier.
Yeah.
And I think consciousness and God are synonymous.
Yeah.
And I think consciousness, you know, I read this book this year called Why Buddhism is True. And it was written by a guy just trying to prove natural selection of the way our brains evolved. But it ended in a very spiritual way, even though he wasn't setting out to write a spiritual book. And he said, let's just be thankful that what the Buddhists have taught in terms of meditating and seeing the unity of all things, that if everybody took that path, then they would realize that we live in a place of love. And it could be the case that the more people would meditate, the more people would be like, oh my gosh, it's dark and scary in there. It's a horrible place, right? And so he was saying, let's be thankful that that's our reality.
Yeah.
And so he was trying to make the case that everybody should at least practice some form of Buddhism, some form of meditation, to realize that that's where we come from. And that if everybody did that, it would make for a more loving world.
Yeah. Or even just starting with baby steps like self-examination. I mean, how often do we actually look inside ourselves at the end of each day and question how we lived our lives?
Yeah,
I think that's one of the most important things. We did that early on with our sons. As you sit down at the end of the day and you close your eyes and you imagine yourself watching yourself in a third person perspective, walking through the movie of your day. Yeah. Are you rooting for that character? Did that character make the right decisions? When were you screaming at them to do something different? And, you know, in a way, you can almost walk through your own life in that same like state of constant self-examination. If you're asking yourself, you know, what would the audience of my life be screaming at me to do right now?
Yeah, I just think it's inevitable that as we continue down this exponential curve, that it's going to take us into unlocking more and more of the secrets of consciousness. I mean, the way I envision it happening in the lattice, which actually it happened as a result of a of a psychedelic journey I did. And the first part of that book is that this protagonist, Dr. Alexander Bliss, he has this audacious idea to hook up psychonauts, the Dalai Lama, meditators, spiritual masters to brain-computer interfaces to find out what's common in their journeys.
Yeah.
And they discover something called the lattice, which is what binds all things together. It's that 96% of the universe that we call dark energy and dark matter, and we have no idea what it is. Yeah. It's a connective tissue of our reality. And once he's able to prove that, and he has this big unveiling at this documentary film festival in 2031 in Telluride, it unites humanity because they see, wow, that actually is our reality. That's where we come from. And that creates this unprecedented takeoff. And the atheists still refuse to call it God.
Right.
Instead, they call it the grand intelligence of the universe, which is kind of a little fun poke at Joe Dispenza, although I have great respect for him. I think he calls it the great intelligence of the quantum field in his books. But it leads to that understanding of where we come from. And I think it's inevitable that that's going to be the case, that we're going to get to this level of understanding because of the technological takeoff and because of this chase for sentience. AI experts wanting to create sentient machines and wanting to really decode consciousness. I think that there's something very divine about consciousness that once you decode it, you just realize, oh.
So it's almost like a theory that by attempting to create some sort of machine sentience that we are going to recognize the source of the sentience within.
That's right. I'm super excited. I'm very proud of the product, put a lot of love into it. I mean, this has been a very important year for me in my own development. 2025 will go down as a year where I read over 55 books.
Yeah.
And really tried to make sense of what our reality is.
I have to ask you though, just as one author to another, with that amount of writing, do you have an actual writing protocol that you follow? Like, do you have a certain time, certain day, certain sequence?
I wish I could say yes, but the answer is no.
Yeah.
I mean, I do know quite a few people. And I've studied Vedanta where, the best time to write is from around 4 a.m. to 6 a.m.
Right.
Because the mind is most clear.
A little bit more of the theta brainwave creative state.
Yeah. But I've just, the truth is that I've found that when I really want to focus, I'm able to focus, and it doesn't necessarily depend on the time of day.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
But I think I'm unusual in that way.
Yeah. So you're more of a when the muse strikes type of writer versus the create a scenario in which whether or not the muse has struck and you're in.
Are you a fan of the book The Celestine Prophecy?
I haven't read it.
Oh gosh, you'll love that book. I mean, it's all about seeing the synchronicities in life. It's like the divine is very playful, and that's the top book recommendation I could give to you. Yeah. But very Celestine Prophecy, one of my very good friends, one of the activities I'm going to do in 2026 is go to Bali and study Siddha Maha Yoga, which is a form of meditation. It's actually a very easy form of meditation. It's not rules based. It's very freeing.
Okay.
And he, as a taste of that, since I'd already committed to Bali, the master teacher for it, this Indian guru, was hosting an online workshop for a week, and it appeared the last week that the book was due. And it actually had a really positive impact on the last chapters of the book. But I just saw, oh my gosh, this appeared at the exact right moment. Now, some people would be like, this is the exact wrong moment to take on anything new.
Yeah.
But it actually turned out to be the exact right moment for me. I knew that it was there to be a helper to me, and it really helped me conclude the book with even more soulful.
And that's the Celestine Prophecy, like CEL?
CELESTINE.
All right,
Prophecy.
cool.
Yeah. Amazing book. A great one on Audible
Yeah.
too. It's like, it reads like a thriller.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I really enjoyed this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So much. Yeah.
Fascinating. I learned a lot.
I did too. I did too. Oh my gosh. I learned a ton. One of the things you don't know about me is, I'm around 190 pounds now, but I used to be 225. I used to look more like a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
Because when
you mean muscle?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. When I first started working out, I was 14, and I was just totally obsessive about it.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, like the reason why was I wanted to start dating, and I went from about 140 pounds to around 225 by the time I was 21.
Yeah.
And it definitely worked.
You were part of that media manipulation too. That the woman that you want to get is the woman who likes guys who look like Arnold.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Oh, totally. I was definitely programmed. I
Yep.
mean, Arnold was.
Yeah. No,
my
I went
idol.
I went through that phase too. I mean, I even carried it all the way into bodybuilding, and all the way up until, gosh, it was 2021. I was still bodybuilding when my wife and I got married.
Yeah.
So I'm about 200 now. I was 215 and 3% body fat
Wow.
in college.
Wow.
And
3% body
that
fat.
also is a pretty unhealthy sport. We didn't talk about the law of diminishing returns with weightlifting, but the amount of muscle that you need to carry and cool, and the not only the psychologically, narcissistic damaging effects of bodybuilding from a mental standpoint, but also just like weight.
Well, I felt less healthy.
Oh yeah,
I felt less healthy.
You're like a piece of muscle laying on the couch with no libido and messed up hormones.
Yeah.
But also not healthy.
It did lead to me meeting my soulmate.
Yeah.
To Deborah. Yeah. I mean, at least the physical attraction was part of the deal, and she is as obsessive at working out and fitness as I am.
I think her
today.
and my wife are on a walk right now.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, I really appreciate your heart and appreciate all that you put out in the world, and highly recommend your book, Boundless. I mean, it is.
Thanks, man.
It is a thick book of everything you could possibly want to know.
Back to AI, though, the last fact-based book I will ever write. Everything else from here on out, I'm only writing stories and personal anecdotes and everything, first-person adventures and life experience, because there's certain elements of that book that I think AI still couldn't wrap its head around, as far as like how different things are stacked, and things you just can't find on the internet. But I think it's just going to be so easy from here on out for any author to churn out a bunch of really interesting facts and applicable knowledge versus stories that are woven into all of that. So
that's true, but at the same time, we have access to content, all of humanity's content, in a queryable fashion, regardless of what language it's in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just mind-blowing to be in a place like Bhutan and conversing with all of their text in English.
Yeah.
I could learn anything I wanted out there.
With your phone.
With my phone. Yeah. So, and it's hard to imagine, as of this recording, that we're just over the 3rd year mark of the launch of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So we are literally at the beginning. And so just imagine another 3 years.
Our brains are going to change when it comes to language and navigation and everything else that's somewhat outsourceable.
Well, cool. Well, hey, I really enjoyed this. Yeah.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks so much.
That was fun.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to Love Conquers Fear. I love that episode. I learned so much, and I hope you did too. And stay tuned. Like I said, I'm recording this at the end of 2025. I can tell you that the lineup for 2026 is unbelievable. I already have all of January, all of February booked. And the gifts just are incredible. So stay tuned, and thanks for all the love all of you gave me throughout 2025. I really appreciate it. As you know, this project is my love letter to humanity. I'm self-funding it. There's no ads, and I'm doing this solely for impact. So I really appreciate all the love you're giving me, and giving you a lot of love back. Thank you.